Last but not least, in these wars of religion, we have the 30 Years' War. The most violent, in a certain sense the most complicated, but it was the war to end all religious wars. The first thing to know about the 30 Years' War is that it takes place mostly in the Holy Roman Empire, even though it's a world war where all European powers want to get involved. But you also have to remember the strangeness of the Holy Roman Empire after the Peace of Augsburg in 1555. Remember, the Peace of Augsburg stipulated, cuius regio eius religio, that is, the religion of the prince established the religion of his principality. Whatever religion he was, that was supposed to be the religion of the people in it. So here's the thing. The Holy Roman Empire, ever since the time of Charlemagne, was traditionally the protector of the papacy and the secular arm of the Catholic Church. It was supposed to be the vindicator of Christendom, so to speak. But now, half the Holy Roman Empire is Lutheran. Lutheranism itself represents the end of Christendom. There is no longer one political entity called Christendom. So it doesn't seem to have this notion anymore. It just simply doesn't have this notion anymore. Not only that, but the Holy Roman Emperor is not made by the, well, he is technically made by the Pope, but he's chosen by 7 electors. If you recall, the Archbishop of Mainz, the Archbishop of Trier, the Archbishop of Cologne, the King of Bohemia, the Margrave of Brandenburg, the Count of the Rhine-Palatinate, and the Duke of Saxony. Now, 3 of those now are Protestant. The Margraves of Brandenburg are now Protestant. The Dukes of Saxony are kind of the original Protestants in a certain sense. They protected Luther. And the Rhine-Palatine is also Protestant. So 3 of the 4 electors of the Holy Roman Emperor are Protestant. Can they even elect Holy Roman Emperors anymore? Does that make any sense? Well, yes, people just let it go. Just because they're Protestants doesn't mean they can't elect the Catholic secular arm ruler. It's a very strange idea, but you just basically got to realize that it's changed its definition. It is no longer really this Catholic secular arm. It really is just one more political entity, and a weak one at that, an increasingly weak one. Basically, all these people are revolting against their own Holy Roman Emperor all the time. It's just one more political thing. It really no longer has religious connotations. A great symbol of that is the fact that Charles V himself, whom you see right here, was the last Holy Roman Emperor to be actually crowned by the Pope. Here he is right here. There's the Pope, and there's the 3 archbishops, Trier, Mainz, and Cologne, crowning him. That in itself is something. As a matter of fact, that's completely against the definition of Holy Roman Emperor. It used to be the electors could only make the king of the Germans, but it was the Pope who made the emperor. Now, the 7 electors just automatically make the Holy Roman Emperor. They don't even bother to ask the Pope. Why would they? It's a half-Lutheran country. Now, but there's more. The other problem was, after the Peace of Augsburg, several places became Lutheran that were afraid to become Lutheran before the Peace of Augsburg. That's one thing to note. So a lot of Catholic places that suddenly became Lutheran after the Peace of Augsburg. But also, the Counter-Reformation has been in full force since 1563. At least full force. I mean, even earlier, but definitely after Trent, it's been in full force. And because of the Jesuits, a lot of places have been becoming Catholic again. So you have a lot of switching happening. A lot of places that were once Catholic since Augsburg are becoming Lutheran. And a lot of Lutheran places since Augsburg are becoming Catholic. Now, when this happens, the Catholics tend to be nice to the Lutherans in their country. They tend to just not enforce the Catholicism. But the Lutherans, no. The Lutherans tend to force people, they tend to enforce Augsburg. They tend to force people to either leave or become Lutheran. Why is it that the Catholics are nicer this time? It's probably because they kind of have the shame of the past, and so they don't want to press their luck by being too mean to the Lutherans under them. But the point is, the Lutherans also might be more scared. As more and more places become Catholic, they don't want to suddenly return to a cocky Holy Roman Emperor who decides to impose Catholicism throughout the whole empire again. So during this time, various unions form. First, the Rhine-Palatinate, led by their elector, who is actually the father of this guy, but I'm going to bring him out anyway, Frederick V. His dad actually forms it, but he'll be the ruler of this Protestant Union. They form what's called the Protestant Union. They formed that in 1608. Basically, it's a military union that's supposed to protect Protestantism in the Holy Roman Empire. And it's led by the Count Palatine of the Rhine, Frederick IV. This is not him. This is actually Frederick V, who we'll see, who eventually becomes ruler. But the union was formed under his father, Frederick IV. Now, the Catholics don't like that. The Catholics are like, well, hey, if you go have one, we want one too. So Duke Maximilian I of Bavaria, if you know anything about Bavaria, you'll know it's always going to be Catholic. He forms the Catholic League in 1608. A different Catholic League, by the way. This is not the same as the Guise Catholic League. He forms in 1609, to also be a military union to protect Catholicism in those Lutheran countries. So you have two military unions forming during the early 17th century. That basically means that if something happens, they're ready for war. There's basically a situation of Cold War in the Holy Roman Empire in the early 17th century. Now, eventually, that Cold War would turn into a hot war, and ironically, of all places, this is going to happen in Bohemia. Now, there's a reason for that. One thing you got to realize about Bohemia is that it has a pretty strong Protestant attraction. And that's mainly because of the influence of Jan Hus. Jan Hus, if you recall, was a kind of early Protestant figure before the Reformation. I mean, he protested against the Catholic Church even before the Reformation even happened. And because of that, Protestant will always be pretty popular in Bohemia, even though it's kind of a Catholic country. Basically, their king, Rudolph II, who was also the Holy Roman Emperor, eventually granted them tolerance. He basically tolerated them. You might ask why. Well, he was a Catholic, but not very. That's because he was much more than a Catholic. He was a humanist. That is, he loved art. He would even spend hours just looking at one piece of art sometimes, and he was a huge collector. He loved studying things esoteric and occult. He was kind of the last Renaissance man in a certain sense. He's known as what's called the Bohemian Renaissance. He's a figure in that movement. But yeah, it just seems he just lived a little bit too late for his time, because everybody else is thinking about religion. He's not. He's not that much into religion. The one thing he does hate is Turks. He hates Turks. But he just doesn't seem to care about pressing Catholicism. He never married as well, which means he's not really securing his own line. Basically, his whole reign, he was less interested in ruling and forcing things down people's throats than he was in just collecting art. So in 1609, he had granted the Letter of Majesty, which basically gave allowance for what's called the Moravian Church, which was basically a Bohemian national church of Hussites and Calvinists, basically. A national Protestant church in Bohemia. Now that's all well and good, except for the fact that not every later ruler is going to appreciate it. So, for example, two kings of Bohemia later, we have Ferdinand. This is Ferdinand right here. I'm going to go ahead and call him Ferdinand II because he's also going to be the Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II. And he was raised by Jesuits. Or not raised, I should say educated by Jesuits. SJ stands for Jesuit, the Society of Jesus. And he wants to bring the Counter-Reformation to Bohemia. So, he basically decides to rescind the Letter of Majesty. In 1618, he revokes his predecessor's Letter of Majesty. This makes the Czech Protestants very mad, and they threaten to displace Ferdinand, and they even invite, let me move these guys over real quick, they even invite Frederick V, the Duke of the Palatine, the Count of the Palatine region, one of the electors, and right now the head of the Protestant Union, they invite him, he's over here, they invite him to become the King of Bohemia. We'll put his name down as well, Frederick V of the Rhine-Palatinate. They invite him to come over and become the king. Now, one thing you should know about him is he is neither Lutheran nor Catholic. He is a Calvinist. He's one of the early Calvinist German princes to convert to Calvinism, and that's going to cause some problems in a second. But so far, you got some angry Czechs in Bohemia, mad at the real ruler, Ferdinand II, who are now inviting Frederick V to be their king instead. Now, of course, Ferdinand II doesn't like this situation, so he sends some regents to go into to go to Prague to talk to the Protestants and try to talk them down, to talk down the Protestant Spanish nobles and try to convince them that this is not in their interest, that he's their true king. However, the Protestants get so mad that they take the two regents and their secretary and throw them out the window in a famous event that is known as the Defenestration of Prague, which we'll see here in this video. So you see right there, basically, according to if we look back at that for a second, according to the Catholic version, they survived. They did survive the fall, and according to the Catholic version, because they shouted Ave Maria as they went down. But according to the Protestant versions, because they landed in a pile of dung at the bottom, which, by the way, seems to have very little support because the earliest accounts don't mention anything about the dung. Now, this event, the Defenestration of Prague in 1618, started the 30 Years' War, because once that started, especially because of the fact that Mary seemed to be on the side of the Catholics, that they prayed to Mary, and then she helped them survive their fall. You can see that right here. Here they are right here. And here's the Blessed Virgin Mary, and somehow this is all these are the winds and the angels basically breaking their fall. It seemed that God was on the Catholic side, and so the Catholics get ready for war. The war, of course, is mainly going to be between Ferdinand II, who becomes HRE also in 1619. In 1619, he's going to be the Holy Roman Emperor. He's on the one side, but he's joined, of course, by the leader of the Catholic League. That's why they exist, for war like this. So Maximilian of Bavaria is involved in this war. He's also going to basically help Ferdinand as leader of the Catholic League. But other places also join in. For example, John George of Saxony joins on the Catholic side, even though he's Lutheran. Why is that? Well, there's really two reasons. One, let's put these guys over here for a second. One is, Lutherans at this point are more suspicious of Calvinists. And if you recall, Frederick V is a Calvinist. Lutherans don't want Calvinists to upset the happy peace that they have from the Peace of Augsburg, and so they'd rather go against the Calvinists. But also it's mainly land. If you look at this right here, remember, John George is the Elector of Saxony, right here. And part of the Palatinate's lands is right here. And so John George is hoping that if in a war between Bohemia and the Palatinate, Saxony might be able to increase its holdings in both areas and basically get a bigger chunk of land right here. So it's not purely pure interest, but what's interesting is a Lutheran is joining on the Catholic side. And then there is also, of course, Spain. At this point, Philip II is dead, but Philip III is going to help his cousin, Ferdinand II, and they're going to also send in troops. So Spain is also involved. So you got Spain, Saxony, Bavaria, and the Catholic League all going up against this. And by the way, in this phase, a famous man named René Descartes also joins the Catholic League, and you'll see, we'll hear about him later, but René Descartes is also joining this war at this point. If you don't know who he is, don't worry, you'll see him later. Of course, on the other side is the Rhine-Palatinate and the Protestant Union, led by Frederick V, along with the Bohemian Czechs. Now, this war pretty much ends in disaster for the Protestants. In the year 1620, there's the Battle of White Mountain. 1620, the Battle of White Mountain near Prague. And that basically ends the Bohemian phase of the war. The Protestants lose, and once they do that, the Catholics get pretty cocky and they think, hey, let's move north. Let's attack northward. Now that we've basically have won the area of Bohemia and we basically won against the Rhine-Palatinate, let's move north and try to get those Protestant areas up in the north. You recall, the Protestant areas are north, but the north is also the best spot because of those maritime cities, the connection to the Dutch Republic, the connection to the Baltic states, etc. Everybody wants the north, but it's mostly Protestants. So the Catholics now decide to make a move to try to conquer more northern territory while they're winning this war called the 30 Years' War. And they start to make progress. They actually, the Catholics really do seem to have the advantage, the military superiority at this point. And here's the problem. Protestants don't want that, but neither does France. Another thing that's very important to mention about the Battle of White Mountain is that when it was over, Frederick V, who had actually been placed as King of Bohemia in the winter of 1619, was deposed again and sent back to the Rhine-Palatinate, and that's why he's known as Frederick the Winter King, because he was only King of Bohemia for one winter, the winter of 1619 into 1620. And the Battle of White Mountain returned things to where Ferdinand remained the king of Bohemia. But another thing that Ferdinand did was he transferred the electoral privilege of the Palatinate to Bavaria. Basically, Bavaria was Catholic, and its leader, Maximilian over here, he was the leader of the Catholic League. Let's see, where'd he go? See if I can find my Maximilian. Just give me a second here. There he is. Maximilian over here was the Duke of Bavaria. He got the electoral privilege, which means that the electors have been shaken up now. Now there's 7 electors, 5 of them Catholic and 2 of them Protestant. The only remaining Protestant ones are the Electorate of Saxony, whose elector right now is the guy we saw before, John George. Let's see, where did I put him? Just give me 1 second. Oh, where'd you go, John George? There he is. Here's John George right here. Just give me a second. Let me bring him to the front so you can see him. We've seen him before. He's still Lutheran. And then also the Electorate of Brandenburg, whose elector right now is George William, but I don't have a picture of him, although we'll see him later. So this situation shook up the electorate a little bit. Now the Duchy of Bavaria is an electorate, but the Rhine-Palatinate is not. It might seem strange at first that France, a Catholic country, should be so agitated by the progression of the Catholic forces towards the north of Germany and over their victories, their clear victories over the Protestants. However, France is at this point not so much Catholic as Gallican Catholic, in the sense that they mainly work for France, and France is Bourbon, whereas Spain, the Netherlands, Milan, the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, all these states surrounding France are Habsburg, and the basic foreign policy of France right now is very simple. Down with the Habsburgs. They're all around us. We don't want them to increase in power. That policy is mainly the brainchild of Jean du Plessis de Richelieu, a cardinal who basically rules France right now. That sounds ironic. A Catholic cardinal rules France, but you'll hear that story later. Cardinal Richelieu realizes that if the Catholics are winning and we don't want the Habsburgs to win, we need to call on another Protestant power to come to the aid of the Protestants in Germany. And when you're looking for Protestant powers, look to the north, look to the Scandinavian countries. All these countries became Lutheran in the 1520s and 1530s, and they've been Lutheran for a long time. So he calls on the country of Denmark-Norway, which is one kingdom right now, ruled by Christian IV. He basically promises, hey Christian, if you join the war against the Catholics by supporting the Protestants in Germany, I'll support you. It'll be at French expenditure. Not alone, though. Christian IV does agree, and pretty quickly the English join in the support under the person of James I, who has a bone to contend with the war as well, because his daughter was married to Frederick V, the Winter King of Bohemia, the king that lost the first phase of the war, the leader of the Protestant Union. Took a while for James to get permission from Parliament to fund the war, but eventually did, and they're funding the Danish now. Also, the Dutch Republic is involved. They also know what it's like to fight against Habsburgs, to fight against Spain. They still haven't really won their independence in the sense that Spain hasn't recognized it officially, so they also pay Denmark to fight against the Catholics in the Holy Roman Empire. Now, it's all to no avail, though, because the Catholics also have their secret weapon, Albrecht von Wallenstein. He's basically this mercenary captain who's ruthless. He was actually born Protestant, but he converted to Catholicism sometime in his young adult life, and Ferdinand II hired him to lead the Catholic League during this phase of the 30 Years' War. And again, he was ruthless. He had a couple advantages. He trained a mercenary army of about 100,000 troops from all over Europe, mainly from Ireland and Scotland. So he's got all these foreign troops, and he doesn't need a supply train. He basically teaches them to live off the land, but what that really means is live off of plundering peasants. So these guys ravaged the Protestant countryside in the north, on their way north to fight the Danish, to fight for the northern port cities, and they basically steal from the peasants. They loot, they burn, they pillage on the way. This will be a theme that we'll look into later of the 30 Years' War, but it all starts with him. In the end, the Danish have no chance. They enter the war in 1625, and already by 1629 they leave. That's the Danish phase. Not only that, but the Catholics, led by Albrecht von Wallenstein, actually do succeed in winning over the northern port cities. Everything looks bad for the Protestants. The Catholics are winning the north, which is typically Protestant, but now the Catholics have the very valuable port cities. The Danish have been beaten, the Bohemians have been beaten. Oh, what's to happen next? The Catholics are pretty happy. The Catholics are so happy, in fact, that Ferdinand II gets a little bold, and Ferdinand II issues what's called the Edict of Restitution in 1629, I believe. Let me just double check that date real quick. Yes, in 1629 he issues the Edict of Restitution. This edict basically restores all territory, religious territory of the Holy Roman Empire, back to the status quo of 1552. Now, if you recall, that's before the Peace of Augsburg. So in other words, if you were Lutheran before 1552, you can be Lutheran now. If you're a Catholic in 1552, you have to be Catholic. If you recall, that's before Augsburg, which means that a lot of places that held out until Augsburg and did not become Lutheran are no longer Lutheran now. There was most of the Lutheran additions to the Holy Roman Empire came after Augsburg. He's wanted to restore beforehand. Now, this actually was overplaying his hand a little bit. A couple things happened because of this decree. First of all, he alienated Saxony. Saxony, up to this point, has been fighting, on the person of John George, the Elector of Saxony, have been fighting for the Catholics, even though they're Lutheran. But this is too far. How dare you do that, Ferdinand? And so he basically decides to side with the Protestants, wherever the Protestants might be at this point. Another person who doesn't like it is Albrecht von Wallenstein. Albrecht von Wallenstein thought that was just bad policy. You got to remember, even though Albrecht von Wallenstein is not particularly faithful to Ferdinand, he is, after all, basically a gun for hire. And he values German unity more than Catholic Holy Roman Empire. He's more of a German unification zealot. And he sees that this is just causing division. And so he starts to form secret alliances with Protestants instead. He just wants soldiers wherever he can get them. He's fighting mainly for German unity. This is when bad blood starts to form between Ferdinand and Albrecht. Albrecht disses this Edict of Restitution. He's known for speaking out against it. And Ferdinand realizes, I've got a loose cannon here. Of course, the other issue is Richelieu. Richelieu sees that the Catholics are still winning. So he decides, time to get in another Lutheran Northern European power, and that, of course, will be Sweden. Richelieu basically opens up contact with King Gustavus Adolphus II of Sweden, and basically says, I will pay you 1,000,000 French livres if you join the war. This is much more than he offered to the Danish, so this is really when the support begins in earnest. Gustavus Adolphus agrees, and he's also backed by Dutch support, although the English step out of this one, because as you'll see, English Parliament has its own problems and they're not going to let the king pay for another phase of the 30 Years' War. So Gustavus comes down from Sweden, our next power. They enter the Swedish phase of the war, which begins in 1630. In 1630, the Swedish phase begins. Now, they don't come alone. In this phase, what they need is the North. And as I mentioned already, John George of Saxony is going to be on his side because he's been alienated by the Catholics. He decides to finally join the Protestant side. But they also force Brandenburg into the war. Here's the problem. The current elector of Brandenburg is George William of Brandenburg. He's the elector, and he's been trying to stay out of the war. He's like, I don't want to fight this war. Brandenburg has no natural defenses. There's no point in us joining the war. But the problem is George William's sister is married to Gustavus Adolphus. In other words, these two guys are brother-in-law. So he basically says, you gotta fight. And so that forces Brandenburg into the war. So you have Brandenburg, which is right here. I'm sorry. Brandenburg in the war, you got Saxony in the war, and you got Sweden in the war on the Protestant side. On the Catholic side, of course, Ferdinand's still the leader. I don't know. Oh yeah, here he is right here. But Ferdinand does not trust Albrecht, so he basically fires Albrecht at this point. No more Albrecht, and he hires instead, or replaces actually instead, Count Tilly. Count Tilly is going to lead the forces of the Catholic League in this phase of the war. Count Tilly's quite good too, but as you'll see, he's no match for the surprise Lion of the North, Gustavus Adolphus. One thing that nobody knew is that Gustavus Adolphus came with a completely new kind of warrior to this battlefield. He had some experience in failed wars against Germany a long time ago, and basically he came with a fully trained army. As a matter of fact, he's credited with inventing the modern military drill. He had an army that surprised everyone because he had 95 different calls and moves that all of his soldiers were drilled in, and he had 3 basic advantages. One is his drilled pikemen. Everybody uses pikemen at this point. They've been doing it since the Swiss developed the idea. But his main idea is he uses less pikemen. He uses just enough and all drilled to basically fend off cavalry from his musketeers. That's his second innovation. He basically uses all musketeers, all of his infantry are supplied with muskets instead of arquebus, the arquebuses, and they're all drilled as well, and basically trying to hack down enemy infantry and cavalry in timed simultaneous volleys. He also supplies his cavalry with new tactics. His cavalry also carry an arquebus, which is kind of strange for this time. Most of the time, they just carry swords and sabers. But these guys also hack down as they go with volleys of fire from their arquebuses. His other main method is to basically deploy the infantry in long lines, infantry of musketeers and pikemen in long lines, rather than in huge squares like the Spanish do. And that turns out to work well because as these guys fire all at once, it just decimates the opponents. And his cavalry also have this tactic of shoot and charge. Shoot and charge. They fire their one volley of guns, and then they charge at the enemy, which hasn't been done ever since the invention of the musket. This is basically was outdated since the 100 Years' War, but he brought it back. He found a way to use cavalry again with their normal advantage of charging. With all these new effects, he does a good job. Basically, he wins his major battle, a major upset for the Catholics, the Battle of Breitenfeld, a massive defeat of the Catholics, and defeat of the forces of Count Tilly at this battle, the battle that will always be his greatest battle. Unfortunately, Ferdinand has no choice but to call in his ancient enemy, Albrecht von Wallenstein. Eventually, these two powerhouses of the Swedish phase of the war finally meet, and they meet at the Battle of Lutsen. At this battle, it was technically a Swedish victory because, as you can see here, the Swedes are routing the Catholic forces. The Catholic forces are retreating from the advancing Swedes. However, because of Gustavus Adolphus's tendency to always lead at the front of his men, he himself was killed in the battle. And so it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory. Wallenstein lost, but Gustavus Adolphus actually died. And so, unfortunately, the Protestants are losing their main hope. Up until now, they've really been losing everything. Gustavus Adolphus represented a shot in the arm, but now he's dead. Now, unfortunately, the Catholics are about to lose their main man too, because, as I mentioned, Ferdinand does not like Albrecht. He has to use him when he can, but Albrecht is getting more and more cocky. He wants German unity. He's acting behind Ferdinand's back to make alliances with other Protestants, and eventually, in a kind of Godfather-esque mass display of assassination, Albrecht von Wallenstein is assassinated along with all of his basic officials in the year, just give me a second, in the year 1633. Basically, he was actually killed in his bedroom. A bunch of troops from Ferdinand II came in and stabbed him with a halberd before he could even really defend himself, as well as killing all of the basic followers of Albrecht in all different areas around his house. So they just lost, in this rather cutthroat world of assassination, the Catholics lost their main advantage. So both sides have lost their respective leaders, but here's the thing, when it comes down to it, leaderless Catholics versus leaderless Protestants is always going to tend towards the Catholics because of the fact that they have the Spanish powers on their side. And that comes to show itself at the last battle of the Swedish phase, the Battle of Nordlingen. At this battle, it's also called the Battle of the Two Ferdinands because it was led by Ferdinand III, the son of Ferdinand II, who's still alive. So he's just and also Ferdinand, the son of the King of Spain, is the son of King Philip IV of Spain at this point. These two Ferdinands, the sons of the two Habsburgs, end up winning this Battle of Nordlingen with their vastly superior forces, and the Swedish are forced to retreat from the south of Germany. The Swedish had penetrated all the way down to the south of Germany, as you can see basically in this map, because of Breitenfeld and Lutsen. The Swedes had gotten down as far as basically this much, but with the Battle of Nordlingen, they were pushed back. Now, once the Battle of Nordlingen was passed, Ferdinand feels pretty happy, Ferdinand II, the Holy Roman Emperor, but he decides it's time to make peace. He revokes the Edict of Restitution, he puts things back to the way it was before the war began, and he basically makes peace with all the German territories, allowing them religious tolerance. And basically, the Germans all come on one side now. Saxony returns to the imperial side, and Brandenburg returns to the imperial side. Even Denmark decides to fight for the imperial side. Denmark has already joined the war, and the main reason there is because Denmark hates Sweden, and so it seems like the war is almost over. But then there's France. For at this point, Richelieu decides it's time to send the French in directly. Basically, all he's tried to do is support Protestant powers has come to naught. The Catholics have been too powerful, so it's time to send the French, who have been slowly rebuilding their army and making a great army after all the Huguenot problems. And so Richelieu sends in the Comte de Guebriant to enter the French armies directly into the 30 Years' War. They're mainly allied with Johann Bonnet. Johann Bonnet is leading the Swedish forces right now. The current ruler of Sweden is now Christina of Sweden, Queen Christina, who was the daughter of Gustavus Adolphus. He, of course, fought the war directly because he was a great military king. She's a queen, and she rather likes philosophy. She loves talking to Descartes and learning about the world and patronizing arts and sciences. So she's not too interested in doing the war by herself. So in the meantime, the Swedish are represented in this war by Johann Bonnet. These two forces unite. Now, of course, they're uniting partially against Germany, which, remember, at this time has united. The Civil War aspect is over. Here's Ferdinand II, the Catholic, and he has united with him now Maximilian of Bavaria, John George, the Elector of Saxony, who's Lutheran, and Frederick William, the Great Elector of Brandenburg. They've all joined together because of the Peace of Prague in 1635, I believe. I can't remember exactly the date of the Peace of Prague. Let me see if I have it here. No, I don't have the date, but basically the Germans are actually united. The point of the war is basically over. Not only that, but the Germans are even kind of semi-joined, at least by words, with the Danish. The Danish have also decided that they're going to throw in their lot with the Germans, mainly because they want to fight against the Swedish. However, the fact is the Danish never show up, and the Germans are exhausted, which we'll see in a second. This war is actually mostly against Spain. Spain, who's still committed to the war on the Habsburg side, who's now ruled by Philip IV. This is King Philip IV of Spain. And that's basically where it boils down, because even though these are all Habsburgs over here, it's only the Spanish who join. The Germans are exhausted. Now, the reason they're exhausted is because this war has mostly been at German expense. As I mentioned before, but now it's time to treat it formally, all the marauding armies of the world have been trampling through Germany, and on the way, who suffered the most are German peasants, especially Brandenburg. Brandenburg lost half its population to this war because it has no natural defenses, and since the war concentrated in the north, Brandenburg suffered the greatest. Take note of that. Brandenburg suffered the most during the 30 Years' War. There was a lot of killing, as you can see in these pictures by Sebastian de Vranckx, of just poor and simple peasants. Here you have women, there's a lot of raping and things like that. There's some rather, disgusting scenes in this picture. Of course, death everywhere. Those three pictures, you kind of saw progressively getting worse. There's the first run of soldiers, they take your valuables. There's a second run of soldiers, they torture you to find even what little you have. Then there's the third run when there's already destruction, but they want more, and they take whatever you have left. Of course, sometimes they would come right into the peasants' houses and take whatever they have of value, billeting themselves. They get to basically room and board in these houses, and all at forced gunpoint. These peasants have no way to defend themselves. Catholics and Protestants are doing this. Here you have a peasant whose house is being burned down. And particularly famous during this war was the Swedish Draft, basically just taking filthy water and pouring it right into someone's mouth, down their gullet, until their stomach burst open. For some reason, that was a particular way to try to get people to hide, to tell where their valuables were. There are, of course, miserable people left by the war. These particular etchings of Jacques Collot, the next 4 pictures are going to be etchings from Jacques Collot. They especially show the miseries of the war, especially how the veterans were not taken care of. They basically had to turn to a life of crime and begging. No one cared about them afterwards. There's no infrastructure to take care of. These veterans are just stranded in Germany. The mass hangings and things like that people took their anger out on, all, in this case because of religion, but just a lot of death in this war. The raping and pillaging, as you see in this picture of this peasant's house. Here's the peasant himself being hung upside down and burned to be tortured for where his goods are. Let's see, you also see his wife being raped in the background here, and terrible things happening all over this picture. It was a terrible war. And here you have the peasants getting back, by the way. It wasn't just the soldiers beating up the peasants, but the peasants would form bands in the forests and come out and find the soldiers, and this particular etching is called The Revenge of the Peasants, somewhat fitting. So you see, it was a war that was very bad for the Germans. In the end, a good portion of the German population died. The highest figures I've ever seen are 11 million Germans died possibly in this war, but even the lowest figures are 5 million. And that's both due to the actual killing by the soldiers, but also to the disease afterwards, and also the witch trials. This war was a war of religion, and often when things went bad, people blamed the occult and they blamed witches. This is kind of the famous witch trials of the 17th century in Europe. It was all part of the reaction to this war. So even though the war was mostly in the Holy Roman Empire, even at this late phase, it was mainly a war, as you can see in these 2 pictures, between the French and the Swedes against the Spanish. For a while, the Spanish had the upper hand, and so Richelieu decided to play games with them again, like they always do. The normal Spanish, his normal foreign policy of war by diversion. Basically, Richelieu offered money to Portugal and to Catalonia in Spain. Catalonia is where Barcelona is, and one thing you can just know right now, whenever there's a rebellion against Spain, Catalonia is always going to join the rebels. Even today, Catalonia wants to secede from Spain. It works. Basically, Portugal rises up against Spain, which has been under Spanish power since 1580, and poor Philip IV has to pull back Spanish troops also down to Portugal and to Spain itself in Catalonia to fight this war. And eventually that means that at the Battle of Rocroi, the French gained the upper hand. This is the last major battle of the 30 Years' War. In this battle, it's once again a French victory. And it's not only a French victory, but it's basically the last Spanish hurrah. As you can see in this painting right here, called the Last Tercio, where the Spanish tercio has basically lost. You can see the flag of Burgundy right here that represents Spain. They lost the war, and the basic thing to think of is Rocroi, or actually let me do it this way, let me get some space to write here. Rocroi in 1643 is basically what the Armada in 1588 was. That is, Armada was basically the end of Spanish naval power, whereas Rocroi was basically the end of Spanish land power in Europe. Spain is on its decline now, and who's the winner? It's ultimately going to be the French, as it was in the case of this war. The French win this last phase of 30 Years' War. The Battle of Rocroi was in 1643. The very next year, peace talks began in Westphalia. Peace talks begin in 1644. These peace talks continued for the next 4 years and culminated in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia, which ended the war. It's called the Peace of Westphalia because it's named after a region instead of a city, because it took place in 2 cities, in Münster and Osnabrück, both of which are contained in this generic region of Germany called Westphalia. The reason that happened is because the Catholics didn't want to meet with the Protestants, and the Protestants didn't want to meet with the Catholics, so basically they just had to have a two-way communication going between these 2 cities as the peace talks were concluding. Here's a picture of it right here. This is a picture of the Munster group getting things together. Now this piece is supremely important. End of the 30 Years' War, but also it basically set a legacy for the rest of Europe. On the next slide, I'll talk about what it basically did. Basic terms of the Peace of Westphalia were that Augsburg was reinstated, but with a new condition. Calvinism is included. But also, minorities were allowed to practice their religion within the realms of princes that didn't happen to hold their own religion. In other words, if you were a Calvinist living in a Catholic land, you could keep your faith. You could practice your faith privately, and also at set times you could assemble at set times according to the laws established by the prince. This is still not religious freedom because there is still a state religion. For each one of these states, the religion of the prince is the religion of the region. But now they're tolerating minorities. Another thing is the Dutch Republic, or the United Provinces of the Netherlands, and the Swiss Confederation become completely independent of the Holy Roman Empire and the Habsburg domains. And it's now recognized on paper. And another couple things. Just give me a second here. I've got to find a way to erase the top. There we go. There we go. That's great. The other thing that came up was France got some small parts of the Alsace-Lorraine. I'll show you the map in a second. And Sweden was also given some bishoprics by France, which of course were then secularized because Sweden's not a Catholic country, so they don't need those Catholic bishops ruling those areas. I'm sorry, I meant to say secularized. Just give me a second here. I can't erase that. Yes, I can. There we go. Let's see. There we go. Secularized. That is, they were taken away from bishops, princes, and given secular princes. As basically a reward for their participation with the French in the 30 Years' War. Another thing that happened is the Rhine-Palatinate was confirmed as an electorate, which brings the electors total to 8. And that's because during the war, something I forgot to mention in this video, Bavaria took the title of elector from the Rhine-Palatinate. That is, when Maximilian was fighting the war, when they kicked Frederick the Winter King out of Bohemia, Bavaria became the new elector. So Bavaria is really the new one, but the Rhine-Palatinate was reinstated as an elector, so now there's 8 electors. You notice there are basically 5 Catholic and 3 that are Lutheran, or Protestant, I'll say, 3 Protestant. And then finally, the 360-ish territories of the Holy Roman Empire are autonomous in their own realms. No foreign power can basically rule over them. And that basically establishes the main legacy of Westphalia, which is, just give me a second here, the legacy of territorial sovereignty. That is, which is going to be the basic way Europe's going to operate, even until now, although especially until World War I. What you're going to see now is basically, the idea is that every ruler is sovereign in his own borders. Of course, what that means now is that fighting is now for borders. And what that means is you basically have to fight. You fight to make it to the treaty, because at the treaty afterwards, you basically draw up the map of Europe after every single one of these wars, and those treaties are where the borders are redrawn. So that's basically it. There's the last thing I guess I should mention, though. There is one more, is that war for religion is passé. This is basically the war to end all religious wars. Now we're going to have a new idea of statecraft for the next couple units. That is all basically presaged by this 30 Years' War and the Peace of Westphalia. Thank you very much. Oh wait, one more thing. Before I close, I told you I would show you what the French won in the 30 Years' War, as well as what they gave to the Swedes. So let me pull that map down. So here's the map of the situation of the Holy Roman Empire in Central Europe in 1648. And if you look, basically the French gained, you can see, let's see, just give me a second while I get the pointer here. The French gained basically areas right here where you can see these small little piddly squat areas that they won in the war. So not really much, but that's what warfare is going to be like. A lot of fighting for just very little territory. And then you see these orange, just give me one second. You can see, just give me 1 second here. If you look, never mind. Oh yeah, here it is. You can see right here these little light blue areas that were given to the Swedish, and these little bishoprics right here. So, and there's even some other tiny ones that you can barely see. But these were given to the Swedes by the French because Cardinal Mazarin just secularized them and handed them over. So anyway, as promised, the territorial results of the Peace of Westphalia.